Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. The White House getting pressed today on its reaction to protests inside of China, what it says and what it refuses to say about what's going on.
The White House today responds to anti-lockdown protests happening in China, which in some cases have snowballed into demonstrations against the Chinese regime.
Our message to peaceful protesters around the world is the same and consistent. People should be allowed the right to assemble and to peacefully protest.
But one thing John Kirby would not say is if the administration supports the Chinese protesters or their cause.
Does the White House support their effort to sort of regain personal freedoms in light of these lockdowns?
The White House supports the right of peaceful protest.
The Chinese regime has arrested some protesters, and in one case, a BBC journalist covering protests in Shanghai. But neither John Kirby on the podium nor a White House statement from Monday issued any condemnation of the Chinese regime's actions.
Why not? We're watching this closely, as you might expect we would. And again, we continue to stand up and support the right of peaceful protest.
And that's in contrast with how the administration responded to protests in Iran. Biden was quick to support protesters there, and Kirby on Monday said the U.S. would hold the Iranian government accountable
for the way it's treating its people.
Meanwhile, Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn is calling on President Biden to, quote, stand up against Xi and support what she calls freedom fighters in China. Biden, who personally met with Xi Jinping earlier this month, has yet to personally comment on the ongoing protests.
Our next guest, John Moody, served as Executive Vice President at Fox News. He's also recently authored the book, The World We Wish, which takes a dramatic look at the Chinese Communist Party from various perspectives and with what appears to be unprecedented civil unrest brewing all across China as we speak because of the CCP's zero COVID policy. We're happy to have John Moody on with us to discuss. John, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. It's a pleasure.
John, from Wuhan to Beijing to Shanghai, Chinese citizens, even in the Uyghur region of Xinjiang, Chinese citizens are taking to the streets. What do you make of this?
I think it's unprecedented since the days of Tiananmen Square. I think that Xi Jinping, the ultimate leader of China, may have misunderstood the support that he has among regular Chinese people when he put himself in for a third 5-year term as ultimate leader. He's the president, he's the leader of the Communist Party, he's the head of the military, and he has more titles than a banana republic dictator. And in doing so, he has now opened up himself as the only target in which you can express unhappiness. You can't blame the local party leader because the local party leader is doing what he or she is being told. You can't blame the medical authorities because they're afraid of the Communist Party. The Communist Party is Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is the party, and the party is China. And that's what's going on. People are tired of it.
John, just how significant is this due to the totalitarian nature of the CCP, who also has a zero-tolerance policy for civil unrest?
Well, that's a good question. We don't know. So far, the police have responded with some restraint. They have, in many cases, outnumbered the demonstrators. And you have to remember just how huge the police force in China is all across the country, but especially in big cities. The police have been growing in firepower and growing in authority for specifically these kinds of events so that they can be put down quickly and, if need be, violently. The thing about the likely response from the Chinese police and other authorities, you can stamp out dissent for a while, but it leaves bitterness, it leaves anger, it leaves resentment, and usually those things come back up again to haunt you.
Now, John, in your book, you visit the CCP's total control over its population and people via science and technology. Do you think we're seeing this unfold with the so-called zero COVID policy? And what are some examples potentially?
Yes, it's an extension of that policy, exactly. China is so far ahead of the rest of the world in researching and implementing artificial intelligence that most of us don't understand how far ahead they are. They have spent hundreds of billions of dollars, I repeat, hundreds of billions of dollars on artificial intelligence. And they're now reached a stage where they can monitor every citizen of China, every one of the 1.6 billion Chinese. They can monitor their eye movements when they're crossing the street via CCTV. They can tell what their heart rate is if they have a watch on that is electronically powered. They can tell you if you are sweating when you're in a line to go through an airport security system. They use all of these things to determine the loyalty, the dependability of their own citizens without ever telling their citizens that they are being monitored and tested and having social credit scores given to them depending on their eye movement and their sweat.
John, you know, when the book 1984 was written, up until about 2 years ago, I think a lot of folks might have thought it was a fictional play. In your book, you mention your concerns with AI. Specifically, you call out Meta, or Facebook, formerly known as Facebook. Where do you see this type of technology going?
Well, I think it's all going into the basket of more party control. Xi Jinping, remember, he's the ultimate leader of China. He's also a very scared man. He knows that he's bitten off as much as any one human being can possibly take and still maintain the kind of control that he wants to have. He wants China's military to become the greatest military in the world, surpassing the United States. He wants its scientific and technological divisions to be miles ahead of the rest of the world. And he wants complete control of the population. And after he's controlled his own population, he wants to control the rest of the world. He will use artificial intelligence. He will use the metaverse for the good ends of the party. And that goes way beyond China. They're testing programs now and ways of introducing people into the metaverse that have never been thought of before, including injectables, where you don't just put on a face mask and look through it and see what kind of game they're playing that day. You inject something and it goes through your bloodstream and you're not able to get out of the metaverse. Now, I don't know how far they've come toward achieving that goal, but it's something that they're working on.
John Moody, author of the new book, The World We Wish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congress is slow-walking its approval of 2023's national defense budget, and the Pentagon is sounding the alarm. Secretary Lloyd Austin warning congressional leadership that this delay puts national defense at risk and undermines the ability to counter China. Here's NTD's Melina Wisecup with the details.
Lawmakers have returned to Capitol Hill with the long to-do list. At the top of their priorities is codifying same-sex marriage. Senators this evening are working on a procedural move to pass the Respect for Marriage Act. Now, this is even as the clock is running out for time-sensitive measures such as government funding, including the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023. Lawmakers have until December 16th to reach a deal on this, but right now it's unclear whether or not they will be able to reach a deal by then. Now, they have another option, that is passing another temporary funding bill, also known as a CR or continuing resolution. But the Pentagon warns that this could come at the cost of national security. Secretary Austin wrote to leadership in a letter first reported by Politico, reminding lawmakers that, quote, under the CR, Congress prohibits the military from commencing new initiatives, such as those requested by our theater commanders in the Indo-Pacific. Now, this is an area where China has continued to use military and economic coercion to destabilize the region. The Pentagon is urging Congress to break its pattern of kicking the can down the road, so to speak, writing directly, quote, we must break this pattern of extensive inaction. We can't outcompete China with our hands tied behind our back 3, 4, 5, or 6 months of every fiscal year. But while delaying the NDAA does put the Pentagon on edge, it may turn out in favor of Republicans, giving them more control and more leverage over what goes into it. That's because Republicans will have control over the House come January. And House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy did tell reporters that he hopes to see the NDAA on hold until January so that they could, quote, get it right. But it's also important to note that McCarthy was one of over 100 Republicans who voted for the House-passed version over the summer. And that House-passed version of the NDAA was well over the $770 billion ask from the Pentagon. Biden also is urging Congress to attach another $40 billion in emergency funding for Ukraine in this package, as well as another $9 billion for COVID. While COVID will be harder to get in there because of Republican opposition, Republicans are much more likely to support the Ukraine spending. But House Republicans have said, although they're supporting this, they do want a better accounting method for how that money is spent in Ukraine. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.